is my pleasure to welcome you to another edition of the Coaching Hour podcast. Very good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you're watching us from. And of course, when you're watching, if you're watching us live right now, that's fantastic. If you're watching this post-event, well, that's even better. Please like and share and comment and do all the good things to help us grow this channel. The Coaching Hour brought to you in proud partnership with Coaches Network South Africa. My name is Paul Rotherham. We're not, unfortunately, today joined by Mary. Mary has other commitments for this session, but we are joined by Mareka, who is with us looking very snazzy in her new glasses. Well, at least I thought they were new, but they're not.
Yeah, not that new, Paul, but it's new for me. So, yes.
It gives a whole new perspective on things because we can see the reflection of your ring light, which I always
Oh, you
find quite
see.
interesting. I don't know if you've ever watched a movie and you watch in the actor's eyes to try and see, or in the reflection of a glass to see if you can see the camera. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. I'm going to be seeing the reflection of your ring light and your screen. My ring light isn't on today. You've just reminded me I forgot to put mine up, but never mind.
See.
Hopefully I'm still looking okay. And of
Yes,
course,
you do.
lovely. Thank you. If you're listening to this and not watching this, well, then none of what I have said will make any sense at all, which is also fine. Today's guest, I'm going to leave Mareka to do the introduction. It's someone who has written a book, which is fantastic. And to me, the name which you are going to mention and introduce sounds very much like a famous actress. Ooh.
Oh, you're gonna share with that with us, Paul, in shortly. So Tania Adams, she's a neuroscience-based ICF accredited executive coach, speaker, and founder of Crazy Always Wins. She's also the author of the Freedom Success Formula book, creator of Neurowire private coaching for executives and leaders, and the Freedom Collective membership for women founders. Welcome, Tanya. It's really amazing to have you today.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel super privileged to be here. It's great to be with the team today.
Thank you,
Thank
Tanya.
you.
So tell us a bit about your journey. Before we get into today's topic, how did you get into coaching?
I've been coaching now for 18 years. I originally was going to be a lawyer. That was the grand plan. Life had other paths for me, and my law career was interrupted, and I found myself in the corporate space, which was great. But it was while I was in the corporate space, I was there for about 8 years in motor retail, that I came to realize that my leadership style was a little different from other people's. And I started to get invited onto mentoring programs and coaching programs
Mm,
in-house. And when I hit the first of a series of borderline burnouts and I was looking for something else to do, I discovered coaching online. And it just seemed like a perfect fit. I didn't want to go back to university and study psychology. That seemed like a long haul. And I was a mom already
mm.
by then and had commitments. And coaching seemed to be the perfect blend of being able to use my corporate skills and my sort of innate ability with human development to blend the two and make a business out of it. And that's really what I've been doing ever since.
Wow, from lawyer to coach.
Yeah.
We've actually had one or two guests, that also followed that journey, which is quite
Mm.
interesting, fascinating. Probably that needs, want to help others as well.
Mm.
Yes. And then you founded your practice, Crazy Always Wins. How did you
Mhm.
get to that name? Just for interest sake.
I was working with a branding coach at the time, and I couldn't come up with a name for my business that would be memorable, but that would also speak to the essence of who I am and how I operate in the world. And
Mm.
she asked me a question, as coaches do, they ask great questions. She said, if your friends and family were to say one thing about you, what would they say about you? And I said, they'd probably say I was crazy. And that's where the name Crazy Always Wins came from. Because I have spent my life just doing the things that I want to do. I left the corporate career, jumped off a cliff, became a coach, and I've just done things that I want to do. And and so people call me crazy. And so that's where the name came from.
Nice.
If I may ask, Tanya, you mentioned that in your corporate world, you were doing things very differently to the traditional leadership style, as it were. And I think that's something that we've seen on the coaching hour over the years that we've been presenting this, is that what is perceived to be the norm very often is not how it works in the real world. So if I may ask, not to digress from today's topic, but what is it that you did that made you feel as if you were very different to all the other leaders in that space?
My style around leadership was less of a telling style, less of a directive style, and more around helping people to find the best version of themselves, asking questions, what would you need to have changed to have hit your goals, your targets? I was in finance management, I was in sales management, I worked across all of the operations, but the thread was always that might come from was this is a person inside there who wants to excel, who wants to do well at their job. And leadership's not about telling people, it's about helping that person to find the route to showing up as they really believe they can. And that was quite unique, particularly in the motor industry, which is where I came from. And it started to stand out. People started to notice. Not everybody liked the way that I did it because the old school was quite dictatorial. But to this day, I've been out of the industry nearly 20 years. I still have people that work for me say, you were the best leader I had. You know, we loved the way you worked. You never catastrophized. It was never our fault. We found solutions together. And I think that's what made me a little different from the rest.
It's interesting because we've all, I think, at some point or another, been in the dealership space in the motor industry. And it's strange because with all the new tech that is coming to motor vehicles, my experience of motor dealerships is still that they're kind of in the dark ages, sorry to say. And I know this isn't a podcast about motor dealerships, but it
No.
seems to me to be one industry where the product has advanced massively and has come
Mm.
so far so quickly. Yet for some reason, the people who sell cars and the spaces that you go to buy cars, there are a few exceptions, perhaps some of the premium, really top premium brands. But aside from that, oh my goodness, it's like pulling teeth when you go into these dealerships. It's quite sad to see. And I wonder why that is. If you're in the motor industry now, if you're in a dealership, maybe you can comment on that. Perhaps it is the dictatorial style or dictatorship style that you say sort of still permeates through those buildings that
Mm.
has prevented the change. I don't know. I don't have an answer to that question, but it seems to be a space that to me looks like I'm going back 15, 20 years whenever I go into a dealership.
I suppose we could always think of it nostalgically.
Yeah, except I
Travel
don't
back in
think
time.
that doesn't sell cars, I'm sure.
No, no.
So
Exactly.
what's the core to what you do? And the reference earlier to a famous actress, it's just struck me. It was Rachel McAdams, because your name as it appears on the Zoom call at the moment is Tania M. Adams. And I think that subconsciously to me, I just thought, wow, that's like a famous actress name. It sounds quite fancy. Tania M. Adams. I can picture it either on a movie screen as the credits are rolling, or on a door maybe for somebody who's quite important. Not that that's what you're pretending to be, but yeah, that just struck me. So
I
what is
love
it
that.
that's at the core of Tanya M. Adams, the crazy always wins philosophy?
First off, that we all have the freedom to do and choose to be whoever we want to be, despite what our circumstances are, despite what we are told is possible for us or what we may have heard growing up. And that the way through to that is to understand how your brain was built, how your patterns around what you give yourself permission to have to access to become were embedded as a child, and then to rewire those patterns at an internal level so that the outcomes that you're really wanting become easier and more fluid to obtain so that you're no longer constantly negotiating with yourself or fighting against your own wiring, that the new wiring shifts your identity. And I work at an identity level with my clients based on the fact that when the identity shifts, the outcomes will shift to match the identity. That's how our brains work.
Now, Tanya, I read the first chapter of your book, and it's quite well written. I love the conversational, tone, the freedom success formula. So we're talking today about what's really keeping you back. But before we get into what is keeping us back, why did you decide to write the book?
I decided to write the book because it was my own lived experience. I spent a large part of my adult life repeating the same types of what people might call self-sabotage patterns.
Mm.
In the book, I refer to it as burning the farm. So I'd hit a particular point that felt tough, felt like burnout, and I could just pull the rug out from under myself and start all over again, either by moving
Mm.
careers, moving cities, by making these major changes, which I believed would cause or create the kind of freedom of time, freedom of energy, freedom of emotion that I was looking for always. I'd always been
Mm.
looking for that. And I started to recognize that freedom had nothing to do with the circumstances. I went through times when I had lots of money but no time, where I had lots of time but no money, where I was living in the city and felt stressed, then I moved to the country and felt stressed. So I realized that freedom had nothing to do with
Mm.
circumstances and that the common denominator was me. And that's when I started to do some really deep work and understand, okay, if this is happening to me, it must be happening to other people. I saw the same process in my clients. And why I wrote the book was to share the model that worked for me, that's worked for my clients, in a way that not everybody's going to come to me for coaching. Not everybody's going to join my
Mm.
group program, but the book makes it accessible and it's written as a coaching process in a book. So if you buy the book and do the exercises, you can receive and learn the insights and begin the process of rewiring your own brain simply
Mm.
by working with the book. And that's really what I wanted to achieve. We were talking earlier about getting the message out to more people,
Mm.
and that's really where
Yes.
the book comes from. Is how do I get this work out to more people in a really accessible way? And that's really what's behind the book.
The purpose of this podcast, I think, is certainly not to replace your book. And we certainly wouldn't want people watching today's podcast or listening and going, oh, great, I've learned everything now. I don't need to buy the book. That would be, in fact, just the opposite of what we'd like to achieve. We'd love for people at the end of this to go and buy your book. But in essence, in a nutshell, what is it that you started implementing? As you say, you moved careers, changed jobs, changed where you lived, and nothing really fed whatever it was that hunger was looking for. So what was the recipe? What was the eventual secret, as it were, that you discovered in a nutshell? As I say, I don't want to replace what's in the book.
Very simply, what I discovered was that our behaviors are driven by what I've come to call invisible identity agreements. And these are agreements that we make when we are small children about who we are, what the world means to us, what other people mean to us, how we must show up. Whether that's I must be a high performer, whether I must work hard. And these translate into beliefs, which ultimately inform our behaviors, and those behaviors dictate our outcomes. When we work outside in, all that happens is we can get to a particular level. Maybe we can even change our thinking sometimes we can influence our beliefs, though until we rewire that and rewrite the agreement that we made all those years ago, nothing's going to change. And that's the principle of that is based on how the brain protects the identity as a function of its need to predict what's going to happen next, because the brain is a prediction engine. And so when I saw the agreement that I had made when I was a child and how that was constantly informing my behavior in my personal relationships as a parent, in my career, in my business, I was able to then change that agreement and everything else just changed with it. And it didn't feel like a fight against myself anymore.
We've had many coaches that have referred to something similar. I think in the industry, the expression is often limiting beliefs. Am I
Yeah.
right?
So limiting beliefs are the layer above the agreements, and beliefs are what we form as a result of having made that agreement. And agreements sound like if I'm not perfect, people will be disappointed in me. And therefore, I always have to stay perfect to avoid people being disappointed. And that's an agreement. And from that, then come beliefs. And so beliefs are just that one layer above agreements that, as I say, we can work on those. So we have to get to that fundamental core agreement that we made when we were very small.
And what's the starting point? This often happens when we are in our infancy stage. I would imagine probably up to 6, 7 years old, when you're really easily influenced and swayed by what's going on in your life by those who are closest to you. How do you, in simple terms, discover those limiting beliefs that will allow you to get to the agreements?
I have a model called the invisible identity matrix, and there's a process where we just reverse engineer from, okay, what are the outcomes that you have that are on repeat that you no longer want? And we simply go through what the behaviors are, what are your values, what are your attitudes towards that, what are your beliefs, and underneath we start to then uncover clues about what these agreements would be. And ultimately we follow the clues, and the clues lead us to the agreement.
Do you find that this is common in that everyone to some extent has them?
Yeah. And it's based on how the brain runs itself in order to schedule resources, in order to keep us alive and viable. The brain necessarily constructs these agreements so that it can have shortcuts to understand what are we going to do with this human body that we're in charge of running now on a daily basis. And they become embedded in the very physical hardware of our brains.
Hmm. And time-wise, are you finding in your experience with your clients, or your partners, as we often use the term in coaching, are you finding this is a long-term process that might take many, many weeks or months even? Or is it something where once you've discovered these agreements, you can actually sort it out pretty quickly?
There's layers and phases to it, which again is based on the science of neuroplasticity. The brain will begin a rewiring process at the moment of an insight. So we could, in one session, uncover what the person's agreement is. And then the process of rewiring takes place by introducing what's known as a prediction error, which is a pause to say, oh, I can see there's an old program running. What if that's not the case anymore? What could I do differently? And then neuroplasticity itself, in the first 90 days, the brain will rewire its mapping of how we behave and what it's prompting us to do in a way that while you're in coaching, it's reasonably stable. And then from 90 days to about a year, by about a year, then you've rewired it to a degree that's pretty stable, like that's more or less consistently stable. What's important to know is that old program never gets erased. It just thins out, if you like, from disuse, like a road that doesn't get used. So there will still be times after that first year that you get triggered into running the old self-sabotage program, which I call a self-protection program because it's designed to protect the identity. So after about 12 months, your new wiring is pretty much stabilized and will become the new default for you. And the longer you run it, I mean, I've been doing this work for years. I still work on myself. I still have the programs that trigger. And if they're really bad, sometimes I sit with my journal and go, okay, let's unpack this. Let's look at what's also true. Let's remember why this is not the whole and absolute truth.
That's quite fascinating. Yes. Paul, you have another question on that?
No, I was just going to say, sadly, I think we are living in a world at the moment, and I look at my own life, and I think time is probably the highest commodity and the most valuable part of my life is time. For many, many years, I used to think it was money, and to some extent, I do still think that money can be very helpful, and secure finances are definitely what a lot of people strive for because it opens up doors. But as you get older, you realize that time is something that you just cannot get enough of. And I think it's quite sad that a lot of these solutions, as it were, it's a little bit like some of the products now that have made their way into the weight loss world, where people don't want to put in the time and the effort and the energy and the exercise. People want what is essentially a quick fix. And so now you can pop a couple of pills or have a weekly injection that within a matter of months can do what previously took regular exercise, a healthy eating plan, a change in lifestyle. I just, and it's not a question, it's more an observation that says people now are looking for something where you can click a button and get a result. There's this feeling of not wanting to work through a process. Hence my question, is this something that takes many weeks, many months? And with you saying it can take well up to a year and beyond, and it's probably an ongoing process, in fact, this rewiring, you can understand why it might be quite simple, yet very few people actually get to do it.
Yeah, exactly. I like to think of the brain as in a similar way to thinking of the muscle. The tissues are clearly different. Though if you observe somebody who's been a runner for years, they develop a runner's body. Somebody who's been lifting weights, they develop a particular shape. Surfers are the same. The brain works in a very similar fashion in that the more frequently we do the same exercise, the more that the networks will cement themselves. And as yet, we don't have sufficient technology or shortcuts like we do with, say, weight loss to accelerate that process. We do know that things like oddly exercise will accelerate a rewiring process, and conscious and intentional practice will accelerate it. So it's not to say that it's always going to take a very long time, though it does require consistency. And what I coach for is micro action, not major. It's better to run, I guess, if you're looking at exercise for 30 minutes every day than to try and run a marathon every Sunday only. And that's what I work with my clients is micro actions the brain is highly responsive. So a small change in evidence will help the brain. And so this is not about lifting very heavy brain weights. It's about putting in small things that are easy to implement on a daily and consistent basis. And then the brain will just do what it's designed to do. And that's what, to me, that's very helpful. The brain and hopeful. The brain wants to rewire itself. It wants to learn. That's how it's made. So that's kind of helpful for me.
Yeah, it's a great analogy, and I think comparing the physical to the mental or the cerebral. I'm a runner, so I can pick up on that very well in what you're saying in terms of, hey, rather do a couple of kilometers every day, go out for a morning run, than not do anything for 6 days and on a Sunday all of a sudden try and do 42 or 21 kilometers, which oddly enough, there are people who live their lives like that, where they can't do it on a daily basis. I think the expression that we use in the running terms is that consistency is really what it's all about. We're training for comrades at the moment, for instance. It's our peak training period now through the month of April and then probably the first half of May. And we've always said it's way better to just do something every day rather than trying to cram it all in and go out and do these 50, 60 kilometer runs that you've never run before. And I would imagine, like you say, the muscle that's helping us run is no different to the brain in some senses, in that it's like cramming. I did that, and I think many of us did when I was at school, would do nothing for weeks leading up to the last exams. And then all of a sudden, the night before, you'd have the coffee and the energy drink and the caffeine pills, and you'd slog through the night trying to do as much as you could, lastminute.com. And it doesn't work. It's, I guess, the same mentality for many things in life.
Exactly. And the brain responds, as I say, well to small iterative behavior changes, and then it will rewire itself.
Tanya, I want to come back to what you've written in the book about the freedom myth. I quite enjoyed, there's a paragraph where you say that you speak to different high performers to ask them, why do they work so hard? And there's always that, I want to be free of working for a boss, or I want to be financially free, or whatever that might be. It is still such a deep driven need why we do what we do, though.
I think freedom for me is something that virtually everybody will have some idea of a desire or a dream for. And I mean, Paul said earlier, I heard him say money was the thing that he thought would give him freedom. And so depending on how we define freedom, there is an externalized quality to that, and it becomes circumstantial. When I have enough money, I'll be free. When I have enough time, I'll be free. When I have the right partner, I'll feel free. When I have the right body, I'll feel free. When I'm in the right social circle, I'll feel free. And we tend to externalize freedom. What we don't understand is that until we recognize freedom is an internal thing, we will continue to repeat the same behaviors over and over. So if I have decided that freedom is about financial freedom and the route to that is to work really hard, I risk becoming a workaholic. And so then what do? And this is my story. I pretty much became a workaholic. So I decided that, working wasn't the right thing to do because it wasn't giving me freedom. So own your own business. What did I do? I overfunctioned when I ran my own business and ended up still unfree. And so freedom is about the ability to experience a state of freedom irrespective of your circumstances. South Africans, I guess, will resonate with many of our inspirational figures who emotionally and mentally were free despite the fact that they were not practically free. And
Yes.
we've seen that. And it's the idea that you're not being run by anything, you're not being puppeted by anything from inside yourself. Because the
Mm,
biggest puppet string puller is really inside us. It's not always outside.
mm.
And that is the freedom myth. It's not about what's going on in your circumstances. It's about what's going on in you, and that allows you to influence your circumstances.
Interesting there because you've mentioned, as I did, finances and time. In your experience with coaching, Tanya, what do you find are the most common, almost myths or false beliefs that prevent people from experiencing freedom?
Some of them are around, I can't say no to, if I'm working with entrepreneurs, I can't say no to extra work because I need the extra work. And so they take on more work on the basis that that's my professional brand. They allow scope creep in projects. In the workplace, I see leaders who believe, who slip into, I need to be indispensable. If I'm not seen here doing the work, I won't get promoted. I need to get promoted in order to be free. Once I get the promotion, then I will. And the narrative sounds like this. Once I just get to the next level in my career, everything will come down again and I'll be available for my family. And that's rarely true, not because the job doesn't allow it, but because the person inside the job simply continues with that previous behavior. The goalpost always shifts. Then it's the next promotion or the next client project or whatever it is. And the brain is just constantly moving the goalposts for us until we get a handle on that.
I must say, I quite see that with some of my, clients, I would say executive level successful people, because they have achieved so much that they reach that point of, but now what next?
Mhm.
So there's that identity that you're talking about then can't be fulfilled because what is the next thing? So I see that quite a lot in that sense.
Yes. And I've had clients who have either retired or been retrenched, and they are even sometimes able to say to me, who am I now? I
Mm,
spoke to one client the other day whose son even said, Dad, I've got to do a school project, but like, who are you now? Because he used to have a label for his dad, and even his son
mm,
recognized that his dad's identity was shifting. And this causes a huge internal crisis, which is not just an emotional crisis. It is actually a crisis in the brain because the brain is going, I don't know now how to schedule resources for this person, where to move them to. I don't, because the identity suddenly has collapsed. And it requires rewiring that identity to settle the brain, give it certainty again, and then it carries on with its normal process.
Quite sad, isn't it? How we put ourselves in boxes. I think the world is very good at putting us in boxes, and then we add to that by doing it ourselves. And I resonate very well with what both of you have just said. I was fortunate enough or worked hard enough, however you'd like to look at it, to land a pretty decent, well, I've never actually called it a job, oddly enough. I was part of a radio show for many years, one of the most successful radio shows nationally and commercially, one of the most successful radio shows globally. And as a result of that, and that success at a relatively young age, I was 23 when I started, and that lasted until, well, 14, 15 years, so until probably my mid 30s. At the time, I didn't really have any appreciation for where I was because it had always been my goal. I knew that that's what I wanted to do, that's where I wanted to be, and I managed to achieve that. The downside, I think, to achieving and doing well at a young age is that it doesn't last. Not always, but very seldom does it last for as long as you think it's going to. And that was the case with me. And when you come down from that, you find yourself feeling completely lost because, as you've said, identity, who am I? What am I doing now? Where do I fit in? What's my role? What's my purpose? And then the literal sense of that and the real world results of that in terms of financially, you were doing incredibly well and now you're not. And just in terms of a sense of achievement, what do you do now and where do you go when you were literally at the top of the top. And I guess I don't want that in any way to sound arrogant, because there will always be things that in some form of measurement could be better. But when you've achieved your goals at a young age, I think it's wonderful. And a lot of young people are racing out to do that. And through my experience in life, I would almost caution people to say, be careful what you wish for, and be careful about being so hungry that you have everything all at once, because when it goes, what are you left with?
Yeah, I think that it's not necessarily only youthful goal achievement. What it is the meaning that we give and associate with that. And that's
Mm.
really at the heart of it. The brain is a meaning-making machine. And this is why I was very specific in the language of agreements. What I heard you say, Paul, was the world puts us in boxes, and then we almost conspire with those boxes. And we agree into that. And the world calls us a radio persona, and we say, yes, I'm a radio persona. And so we start to give meaning to, what does it mean to be a radio persona? What does it mean to be at the top of my career? What does it mean to have all this money? What does it mean? And those meanings, the more that we are attached to them as a this is who I am agreement, that's where the risk is. If we can achieve our goals and go, well, I achieved that goal and that's a thing that I achieved, it's not who I am, then when that, let's call it your radio persona identity, is no longer the way that you are moving through the world, because that's all it is, it's a vehicle, then what happens is your identity becomes, I am someone who goes out and achieves my goals. Then it doesn't matter if you're going to be a runner, if you're going to be a radio persona, if you're going to be a graffiti art, doesn't matter, because my identity then is I am somebody who achieves my goals. And for me, that's the key distinction, is what meaning do we give to this version of me that's showing up? Is it the I am? And to what degree is that I am externalized versus internalized? And that's really, in my journey, for example, I now know that I could probably take on most of anything that I want to learn and do it. But there were periods in my life where I had clear definitions of who I am, very important person. And then when that very important persona went away, it does leave us destabilized. So yeah, it's not necessarily about youthful achievement of goals or going for it all at once. It's about what meaning do we give to that thing that we've become. Is that the definition of who I am, or is it something else? And that may be helpful for people who are big goal achievers. It does stop the crash after I've achieved a goal, when you go, well, I'm not the goal. I am someone who achieves goals, which gives me freedom to choose a new goal.
Beautifully put. And I think I would have done well receiving that advice in my mid-30s when I left the radio station I was working with, because that is literally how I felt at the time. It was like, oh my goodness, this has all come crashing down. I'm not this anymore. And you start all of these lies that you're not good enough and you're not worthy and you weren't actually talented in the first place. And you go on this whole diatribe with yourself about what an epic failure you are. And not that I was wallowing in self-pity. I've tried to never be that sort of person. But I think it's very easy, even more so now, it's very easy to put these labels on. You see it everywhere you look on social media. Everyone has a label. I'm a this, I'm a that. You see it on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram. And I think as you become older, and thankfully I've moved way beyond putting myself in that box, but I can see very clearly now, looking back on my life, that for many years I was Paul the radio presenter, and it can be incredibly limiting. And not to say that I didn't find fulfillment in what I did, and I do still do it. I have the pleasure of still doing what I love now on the radio, and it's fantastic. And I'm with another station and get just as much joy out of doing now what I did back then, although it's a completely different show and a different audience and so forth. But I haven't given myself the label because of the experience of what can happen when you do give yourself labels. So I think that's been really insightful. I know we're not talking about labels per se on the podcast today, but it perhaps is giving you some food for thought if you're watching this now or listening to this thinking, hang on, how do I define myself? How do I see myself? And perhaps sometimes we shouldn't be thinking in label terms at all.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Tanya. I can see how your book can really be very eye-opening. I mean, just this conversation switched something in my brain because it's true. We all identify with the role that we play in life, whether it be a radio presenter, being it a coach, it becomes part of who you are, and it can be limiting you or putting you in a box, especially if you want to achieve other goals, but then you feel this inner conflict between, yes, but I'm actually this. So how can I achieve that if I'm this? So it really makes sense. So thank you so much. We're going to put the link, also to your website and where people can get hold of the book, in the description. Because I think if there's practical steps, as you've explained, it can be life-changing at the end of the day to identify those identities that is running the show. So thank you.
It's my great pleasure. I'm glad that I was able to impact you guys and the audience as well.
Thanks, Tanya. And out of interest, where are you based?
In Cape Town. I coach
Lovely.
globally on a virtual platform, obviously, but I'm based in Cape Town.
Okay, fantastic. It's always nice to know just where our guests are based. I just always find that interesting. So thank you for sharing that. I would imagine we can find your wonderful words, Crazy Always Wins, on the online platforms. If that's a book that we'd like to order, where can we get that?
The book is available on Amazon. So if you just type in Freedom Success Formula into Amazon, it's available on Amazon. And then if you go onto my website, crazyawayswins.com, there's a pop-up where you can download a free chapter as well, which if you want to just experience that, as Marika did, and before you purchase the book, that's available. And then, links to all my other work are on the website as well. And I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn. I've got a YouTube channel called Freedom Rewired. So there's lots of places people can kind of get hold of me if they want to.
Fantastic. A pleasure having you as our guest for this edition of the Coaching Hour. Thank you very, very much, Tania M. Adams. We'll look forward to keeping in touch with you. And if you do have any questions, comments, or anything that you'd like to add into the conversation, please do so here. You'll see the space for that depending on how you're consuming this video stroke audio. Thank you for joining us from myself, Paul, and Marika. Brought to you in partnership with Coaches Network South Africa. This has been another episode of the Coaching Hour. We do hope you'll join us for the next one. Bye for now.